This week in the Black Barn, I've selected a terrifying account from the 19th century about a terrifying event that happened at the Gyb Farm. Also, I look at an account of a family terrorized by Bigfoot, an account known as the Ruby Creek Incident. It's going to be a good time, so let's get to it.
I'm Alan Brill. Welcome to Brilliant, a podcast from the mind of Brill. Warning, it gets dark in here.
This week on the Weird Files, I dug up two stories involving using animals as weapons. The first one comes from the NewYorkPost.com, June 10th, 2025. In Murray, Kentucky, a 40-year-old man named Jonathan Mason, but known around town as Cowboy Cody, was arrested for throwing an angry raccoon into the Big Apple Bar and Grill. The issue? He was denied entry into the establishment following a drunken mule incident. The poor varmint ran around in a panic and a bidden employee, but was ultimately wrangled by someone with raccoon handling skills, who wrapped the critter up in a towel and removed it from the bar. Our second story comes from March 13th, 2025, WoodTV.com. A gas station in Denmark, Texas, was held up by two men armed with pythons. Gas station employee Miara Val said, "They were just waving them around and putting them on the counter. The snake is a weapon, you know." After scaring the staff, the two men absconded with $400 worth of CBD oil and sped away in a small car. Here is a terrifying first-hand account of David Eustace, who wrote the following account for the Anglican priest and chronicler of the supernatural Frederick George Lee. The account was written in February 10th, 1877, about events that occurred in 1837. Some 40 years ago, my father resided at a small farmhouse, the back part of which faced a large, unenclosed common, since enclosed, and stood close to four crossroads, two of which lead to what thereabouts is called Uphills, the Chilton Ridge, and the Tring in Wycombe and Skoken Church. The spot is lonely even now, but was much more so then, for at that time there was not a single human habitation within a quarter of a mile of my father's abode. Our house had been called the Gyb Farm. Why, we did not exactly know, but because, as we afterwards found out, there had been often erected near the site of it a gibbet for the punishment of malefactors, and many a person who had taken his own life, let alone the murderers, highwaymen, and sheep stealers, had been buried at the side of the road there. But the name of the farm, as the law parchment states, seems to have been altered in the year 1788, when a much less disagreeable name was then adopted for it. All right, I'm going to interrupt Eustace's narrative for a second. A gibbet, as defined by Google, is an historical upright post with a projecting arm, similar to a gallows, used to hang, expose, or display the bodies of executed criminals, often in iron cages as a public warning. So, like, you know, in the movies when you see the round cage with, like, the skeleton in it reaching out for help, that would be a gibbet. He also mentioned people buried by the crossroads, of which he said there were four crossroads in the area. It was common practice to bury people who took their own lives, as well as murderers and other outcasts, at crossroads to prevent their unquiet spirits from returning to haunt the living. They believed that the multiple paths would confuse the spirits, and plus, you know, the crossroads, they form a cross, which would, you know, keep the evil spirits bound to the earth there. Okay, back to Eustace's account. In the year, and about that time, that King William IV died, i.e. 1837, my father and mother, two of my sisters, a younger brother, and myself were all at home. One night, when we had all been in bed for some time, quite in the smaller hours, we were each suddenly startled and awakened by the most frightful, shrill, and horrid shrieks and noises just outside on the roadway that ever man had heard. Partly human, and partly as if made by infuriated hogs, violently quarreling, the roar and the screeching simply appalled us. I had never heard the like of it in my life. It went through and through me. For a little while we all endured it, but in about 5 minutes we gathered half-dressed at the top of the staircase. Father, mother, my brother, and I went to a long front window overlooking the road in order to learn the cause. The night was rather dark, and our tinder box would not light. We were looking out, without any candle or lamp, towards the spot from which this horrible and hellish row came, when all of a sudden a white face, a face most awful in its pallid aspect and miserable imploring look, was pressed from outside against the glass of the window and stared at us wildly. We all saw it, and I can mark that even my father was deeply affrighted. The indescribable and unearthly noises still continued, and even increased in their discordance, and the frightful yelling at least 4 or 5 more minutes. Then by that time a candle had been procured. My father at once opened the lattice, and there by the light of the sky, such as it was, we saw a collection of the most hideous black animals, some of them like large swine, others horrid and indescribable in their appearance, grubbing up the ground half buried in it, scattering the earth upwards where the graves were, fighting, screaming, and roaring in a way that no mere words can properly tell or set forth. Some of them, judging by their motion, seemed to have no bones in them. We were all very much terrified. My mother implored the Almighty to protect us, and I confess that, overwhelmed by fear, I prayed most heartily to God for assistance. In a minute or two after this, the shrieks increased, and the intensity, the frightful creatures, whatever they were, rushed screaming down one of the roads. In the morning, there was not a sign nor a sound to be seen. The ground had not the least degree been touched, scratched up, nor disturbed, but the ghosts of the gibbet, as we afterwards discovered, had been seen by others than us. What a horrifying experience that would be. A nightmarish hellscape like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. These nightmarish things, they seemed to me, it sounded like they were eating the dead that were buried there. Fighting over them, as a matter of fact. But what were those things? Demonic is thrown around a lot these days, but it might fit here. And another strange thing about this is there was no sign the next day. So were they peering into another reality? What a terrifying and bizarre account. And the fact that the whole family had seen them, at least according to David Eustace, wouldn't be a shared hallucination. So, yeah, the ghouls of Gyb Farm. That's a weird one. That'd definitely shake you up, Now we're gonna move on to a very famous Bigfoot encounter, the Ruby Creek incident. So let's get it. At around 3 o'clock on a clear September day in 1941 in British Columbia, Jeannie Chapman's 9-year-old came barreling into the house, yelling excitedly that Cow was coming out of the woods. Now, she was confused as to why he was going on and on about this. He seemed to be disturbed by an animal that the kid was very familiar with. I mean, a cow shouldn't cause this much distress. So she decided to go out and see what was going on. Now, her other 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, were still playing in the field behind the house. When she saw what at first she thought was a very large bear, so she, called to the children and they came running to her immediately. And then the creature moved onto the railroad tracks and she saw that this was no bear. It was a gigantic man, she said, covered all over in pale yellow-brown hair. She estimated its height at 7.5 feet tall based on some fence posts that she was familiar with, and said that it had a small head and essentially no neck. This creature continued coming in the direction of the house, and Mrs. Chapman said that she had, quote, much too much time to look at it, end quote. She stood her ground while she sent the eldest boy in to the house to fetch a blanket. The kids were understandably freaking out, and the whole operation of getting the blanket and returning with it and getting the kids corralled took 2 or 3 minutes, and during which the monster had advanced to within 100 feet of the house. Now, she spread the blanket out and held it up between the children and the creature, because she thought if the creature was to see the small size of the children, it might try to run off with one of them. So holding this blanket up, screening her children, from the creature, she backed down to the river beach, and then they raced down, never looking back, never looking to see if it was chasing them or anything. They just hightailed it out of there. Now, her husband, George Chapman, who had been working at the railroad depot all day, was completely unaware of the events at the house, and he returned home a little before 6. He found the door of the woodshed battered in and gigantic footprints all over the yard. He yelled for his wife and children and rushed to the house, and when he dashed all through the house, looked for them, couldn't find them, went into the back, he found their tracks heading to the village. So he ran to the village, made sure that they were safe, and then he returned to the house where he found more of the creature's enormous tracks farther upstream, coming down out of his potato patch and crushing his potatoes, eating some taters, I guess. In the woodshed, he found a 55-gallon tub of salted fish had been broken open, and that requires immense power to heave a 55-gallon drum of salted fish up and bust it open like that. And he found long brown hairs in the wooden doorway that he used to confirm the creature's height. The local police investigated, and plaster casts were made of the best of the many tracks that are found around the house. The track continued to appear around the house for another week. On 2 occasions, their dogs were greatly agitated. They raised a ruckus at about 2 in the morning, but the creature never harmed the dogs, nor apparently did it touch the woodshed or go near the house again. But its presence alarmed the Chapmans so much that they moved into the village, abandoning their home. So the thing hung around for a week, but didn't break into their woodshed or try to get into their house again. But that was just knowing it was out there was too much for them. Left their nice homestead and moved back into the village. Now, Bigfoot wouldn't become a household word in the United States. People wouldn't, most people wouldn't be familiar with this creature until 1958. But the Chapmans were members of the First Nations people and would no doubt be very aware of the Sasquatch. And it would be a familiar concept for them, so they would have known what it was all about when they saw it. But I don't think for even a minute that they misidentified a bear, as some people have said. They would be absolutely familiar with bears. She got a great look at it, and plus there's the tracks that resembled a human foot and not a bear. And also, is it a hoax? The level of work and energy it would take to hoax this, because it was investigated by the local police. There were so many tracks found. It would be ridiculous and pointless and costly because they lost their salted fish. So I don't think that they hoaxed it. What I think a Bigfoot terrorized the Chapman family. That's my opinion, I guess. But it's my show, so I'm gonna run with it. That's a synopsis of the Ruby Creek incident. It's that's it in a nutshell. It highlights fascinating case. A very famous encounters in the annals of cryptozoology, and I find it to be a credible one. The Ruby Creek incident, yeah. I sourced a lot of that from Bigfoot: The True Stories of Apes in America by Lauren Coleman, who I think we used last week even. There we go, if you can see it. And for the Gyb Farm the Ghouls, I used High Strangeness by Richard Freeman. It's a fantastic book. It just keeps on giving. So, yeah, I think that's it. I think that'll do it for this week. Thanks for dropping by the Black Barn. If you dug this episode, please hit that like button. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Either way, I'm going to be back next week with another show highlighting the strange corners of our reality. So until then, keep it weird, y'all.
Keep it weird.